Each of us has our own set of habits and routines we use throughout the day. Showering in the morning before work, or in the evening before bed. Eating 3 meals a day. Spending our free time reading, playing games, or going to our favorite spot in the city. We all fall into certain patterns of behaviors that can last years, decades, or even our whole lives. Every habit seems to have a hold on us. Whether they were stumbled onto or forced onto us, once they set in, they become hard to break. We want to eat healthier, spend less time on our phones, make new friends, pick up new hobbies. But more often than not, these good intentions tend to fail. Whenever New Year's comes around, many people want to get into shape, buying a new gym membership. Yet 50% will cancel before January even ends, and only about 20% stick around by the end of the year. The guitar maker Fender also found out that nearly 45% of their sales come from new players excited to start, yet only 10% are still playing after the first year. What makes changing our habits so hard? Why do we get stuck doing the same things? The brain has a certain level of flexibility that allows it to adapt to different situations. This is why people can be thrown into any situation and likely find a way to survive. It is the same reason why humans can live on every continent in nearly every possible climate. This plasticity may be what gives people the creative ingenuity to find a way to constantly adapt, whatever the circumstances. But there are limits to this flexibility. Human brains are most adaptable in the early years, when it is still undergoing extensive development. During the first 2 to 3 years, the brain builds up a huge number of connections. Then, as they get older, the number of connections start to dwindle, while the strength and speed of the connections ramp up. They are going through the process of learning and specialization by focusing on the connections that matter, the ones that represent new knowledge and skills, and pruning away the ones that aren't important. At the same time, it is building better pathways between various parts of the brain to connect them more efficiently. As these changes happen, children get better and better at all the things they've practiced, patterns they've repeated again and again, as they go from conscious tasks to automatic habits. This is why we never forget how to ride a bike. When artificial neural networks go through a similar process, it is said to converge onto a specific model. Neural AIs go through a training phase where large data sets are fed into the network, changing its connections a bit at a time, getting better at the task it is given as it makes less and less mistakes. Once it reaches the optimal performance, the connections it has makes up the model, a complex representation of the data it was trained on. This model could be recognizing cats and dogs, translating one language into another, or driving a car between 2 points. Convergence has an interesting property. It only happens in one direction. Once a model is trained, it cannot be untrained, and it cannot be trained on a different task. If it was further trained on unexpected data, it can even ruin the model, making it lose the optimal performance that it had. While AI functions more simplistically than real neurons, the property of convergence could explain why we have difficulty changing our habits. As we grow and refine the connections in our brain, it is building up its own model based on our life experiences. It is adapting itself to every little detail from our lives. The habits and behaviors of people around us, how they talk, move, and act, the kinds of homes and communities we grew up in, what we're taught in school, the friends that influence us, the kinds of restaurants and shops we visit. Our brains are creating an internal representation of our little slice of the world, but in doing so, it is converging more and more, becoming harder to change over time. This doesn't just apply to knowledge and behaviors, it also affects our beliefs. Most people on Earth are born into a culture steeped in religion. There are billions of believers across multiple major religions that have existed for much of our history. As children are born and brought up with ceremonies, practices, and gatherings, they have learned to believe as well. Their young brains absorb the texts and rules, ingraining them into their internal model. In recent years, the importance of religion in North America seems to be on a decline. As the younger generation is exposed to a wider range of perspectives and cultures through education and online information, they have generally become less invested in religious beliefs. Of the Americans that left their religion, almost 75% reported leaving by the age of 18, and a majority of Gen Z no longer think it is necessary to raise kids with religion. With each new generation, more children will either be born without religion or become more likely to leave it, gradually shifting the cultural narrative towards something different. While it can be difficult to change how we behave or what we believe, it can happen if the environment around us begins to change. Habits are reinforced by familiar cues all around us. The TV in the living room, the phone by our beds, the books we read, and the stories we're told. Each of these cues makes it easy to fall back into the same patterns. Changing the environment to remove these cues or make certain ones harder and easier to find is an effective way to change habits. Keeping screens out of the bedroom creates a space dedicated to sleeping. People tend to work better in designated workspaces like offices or coffee shops. Removing or hiding distracting apps on laptops and phones helps focus on productivity or studying. To make more significant changes, we can also make dramatic shifts. Moving to a new city, going back to school, switching jobs can change many different habits all at once. Changes to the environment, big or small, prevents the brain from using its established patterns and pathways, forcing it to adopt new ones. It can often feel like we get set in our ways, especially as we get older. We become used to all the routines and habits that bring us comfort, while avoiding the ones that may be challenging and difficult. It can feel like a train traveling on a fixed set of tracks, compelled to continue on the same path carved by our past experiences. But each of us has the ability to push ourselves into a new direction, to redirect our psychological momentum and take us to new places. While our neural circuits may have the tendency to converge onto familiar, repetitive patterns, it is also amazingly adaptive to new ones. All it takes is the right nudge.